Here's why I think the 49ers should trade George Kittle.
Oh,
Of
man.
all the players on the team, I think he makes the most sense to trade. Not Deebo Samuel, not Nick Bosa, George Kittle. George Kittle is an elite tight end.
Yes.
But he missed 11 games the past 2 years. He was injured all of the last 2 seasons. He got injured week 1 both years and basically soldiered it out the whole time, which is great. So he's been hurt a lot. He's missed time. Turns 29 in October. And if he has another injury-filled season, he will become untradeable. He will be the next Jimmy Garoppolo on your team, where he's getting paid elite money, and it's been 3 years in a row that he hasn't given you elite results, 3 years in a row that he's been injured, and then the next year he'll be 30. So whatever you thought you could get, he's just an albatross because of his contract and his injuries, just like Jimmy. He's 1 year away from being the next Jimmy. And I'm not saying he will. He could have a bounce-back year, but he's had 2 in a row. What are you banking on? His playing style? The way so far, his injuries have been a lot of non-contact stuff as well. So the way I see it is when they paid him to be the number 1 option in their passing attack. They gave him $16 million a year. That's wide receiver money. And they're like, that's cool because we use him like a wide receiver. We give him so many targets. Not anymore. Now it's all about Deebo. And when Trey Lance is the quarterback, it might be about Ayuk as well. Lance is the opposite of Jimmy Garoppolo, who wants to work in this little area. Lance wants to go way out. He doesn't really, he kind of is erratic in the little area. He wants to go down the field and outside the numbers. So Kittle got phased out down the stretch. He was getting like 25 yards a game, 2 catches a game, and a lot of the games down the stretch. I think if you trade him now, also he's a big Jimmy Garoppolo guy. Who knows how he feels about the Trey Lance era? If you trade him now, you could get a late first. If you wait a year and he has a repeat of the last 2, he's the next Jimmy Garoppolo on your team.
I cannot fault you for what you say about if he has another injury this year. To me, I think you're dead on with that. Like, you could wind up in a scenario where that contract becomes an absolute albatross and you can't move on, and he's a little bit, a shell of himself after suffering through multiple injuries. To me, though, this feels like it would be a mistake on the level of DeForest Buckner, in that you get these guys that epitomize what you want, not just at the position with what they bring on the field, but the mentality that they bring to it as well, and the meaning that they have within the locker room. I thought it was a mistake to trade DeForest Buckner when they did. I understood the move from a financial standpoint. And I would understand if the 49ers moved on in this regard in how you're suggesting they should trade George Kittle as well from a financial standpoint. But from an emotional team building standpoint, to me, it doesn't make sense. You have a skill set that fits in Kyle Shanahan's offense beautifully. You have an individual whose injury prone nature is based on his style of play, but that style of play is admirable. It's one that you want your offense to have, right? Kyle Shanahan is striving for this positionless offense. Everybody's a dog. Everybody's got this I'm going to run through you mentality. And Deebo and George Kittle epitomize that on the offense. To me, it's why you have to pay Deebo this offseason, and it's why trading George Kittle would be a mistake, because it's a part of your offensive identity.
The difference between trading Kittle and trading Buckner is that Buckner was 25 when they traded him.
Right.
Buckner had missed 1 game in 4 years when they traded him. Buckner was the 7th pick in the draft and got better. Kittle was a 5th round pick. He had some great years, but the last 2 have not been great. He's missed 11 games the last 2 years. Buckner's never done anything like that. Part of the thing with Buckner was the durability and the consistency and the fact that he always gave you the same effort and you could count on it week in, week out. Kittle is not that guy anymore. Kittle's the guy that gets hurt week 1, and then he's telling you about it all freaking. Well, that's what he's been the last 2 years. And this year it was a calf injury that he just mysteriously got week 1 and limited him the entire year. To me, I would. It seems like his body is trending a certain direction, and I wouldn't bank on him having a bounce back where he's suddenly durable at 29. I mean, even in 2018, 2019, he played through a lot of injuries. He's always been injured. I mean, this is kind of who he is. I feel like it's going to catch up to him. I understand keeping him, but I think it's an emotional decision. I think you could get a 1 for him now. If he has another down season, I don't know what you get for him. And again, like he's still a good player. He's still really good, but 16 million a year good? Can you afford to pay that for him when you're not even targeting him that much, when the whole offense goes through Debo and he's hurt a lot of the time? I think no. And I think you got to make business decisions, not emotional decisions. I know he's friends with the players in the team. He's part of the identity, part of the – I don't know if he can be part of the foundation anymore. Not when you're approaching 29 and you miss this many games and you're hurt this consistently. If he could turn it around, great. But I keep going back to what Bill Walsh said. Better to trade a year early than a year late. And the whole thing with trading a year early is it's scary. It's scary. You're like, well, it's a year early, right? What he's 29, right? He could bounce back, right? We don't know. So that's why you say it. If he doesn't, you're screwed. It's like you had kind of a so-so hand. You just really needed to wait and see what the river was. And you're like, oh, I still have nothing. And I put a bunch of money down. Like that's where you're at. You don't want that to happen. So you don't know what's going to happen in the future. You're trying to figure out how much money to wager on the flop.
Hey, at 2019, it looked like maybe the Chiefs had given up on DeFord a little early. And then by the end of 2019, 2020, it was like, that's why they got rid of him.
Got it.
Because they understood.
If the Niners started calling teams offering Kittle, I'd be nervous. Like, what the hell do they know that we don't?
Right?
Yeah.
I do think, for me personally, it's definitely emotional. When you start this topic, I'm like, Grant, we stop talking about George Kittle. This is George Kittle we're talking. But that's just me being attached to him as a player. I was going to bring up the Bill Walsh philosophy as well, because I do think that applies here. You're talking about a guy who is a little bit older for where he is in his contractual status, right?
Doesn't apply to Bosa, doesn't apply to Debo, but if it applies to anyone, it's Kittle.
He's close to 30, and I do think that Bill Walsh would explore this idea, in particular if he had his eye on someone he could bring in to replace him, right? There are a couple of sort of borderline tight ends that are out there that you could see bringing in. You would save significant money, you wouldn't have to commit to them long term, and you would bring in a considerable asset for George Kittle at this point in time.
And final thing, I mean, the money they would save, you get rid of Jimmy this year, that's $24 million in cap space. And Kittle, if you trade him pre-June 1, you save $3.4 million this year, $7.7 million next year, $13.5 million the year after that, and $15 million the year after that. If it's post-June 1, it's $11.9 this year, $12.2 million the year after, $14 million the year after, and $15 million the year after. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And unless you see yourself using him heavily the next 4 years, then keep him, of course. But if this is like he's getting phased out anyway, I mean, what the hell happened the last 6 weeks, Rob? Like Jawan Jennings was getting more looks at him. That can't keep you got to tell me he was hurt, Kyle. You got to tell me he was hurt and that the plan is that he's going to have 125 targets next year. But really, I don't want him to have 125 targets. I want Debo to have as many as Cooper Kupp. How many did Cooper Kupp have this year? That's how many I want Debo to have. The hell?
A lot.
I want that. Thanks, Kittle, but it's all about Debo now. And I really think there's no way the Niners can justify paying him what they paid him that because they didn't know about Debo. Now it's like, man, what's more value to them? Kittle at 16 million at 29 or a first round pick? That's the question. I don't know. Is he worth the first round pick? That's my question. Or is it a 2?
The other question is, does Kittle benefit from the move to Trey, right? Assuming that the worst case scenario doesn't happen and we actually move on to Trey, I think you have to ask that question. I would hope that he does. I would think that some of those deep targets would come back. I mean, Nick Mullins was the one most responsible for George Kittle's statistical season back in 20.
It's like, George, what would you rather do? Catch the ball and run through 5 defenders or catch the ball over the top of the defense? You tell me, man, because you can do that, right?
But you have to ask, in asking that question, will he progress? You have to say, has he lost a step in the past couple of seasons since that magical 2018 statistical season? Is he the same deep shot that he was? Because he didn't look like it throughout last season, but that was a lingering freaking injury that was there since week 1. And so you have to begin to weigh, is that injury going to reoccur? What's the likelihood of that? Has he lost a step? Do we get the value? I would guess, though, that there's significant dead money associated with trading George Kittle as well. My guess is because
I just went through it. Pre-June 1, it's a little bit more. Post June 1, you get some breaks, but still, it's like, it's not just this year, it's the whole life of the contract.
Yeah, it's not the cap savings. I'm more concerned with that dead money that just becomes an albatross.
Certainly, but what the bigger albatross is if he's hurt in the future and you can't move him,
Not
like
contributing.
If
Yeah.
he's DeForest, then that's the real albatross. And the better thing is to get rid of him now. But we don't know. Swan Song says Jimmy G, Kittle, and McFloppy for pick 11 and 20. No, here's the problem. That's a lot of money going to a team. Some team would have to have $100 million in cap space to take on for. They'd rather just probably cut Jimmy. You can't send out that much money. Can't happen. Would you trade Kittle in a pick to Miami 4 picks? Yes, but what is Kittle worth? To me, I'm not sure. He hasn't had 2 great seasons. I mean, it's been 2 years since he's been elite. Maybe a first.
I would think so.
On that? Maybe a first, late first. Debo today is where Kittle was when Kittle broke the tight end record. We used him into the ground. I hope I'm wrong, though. Here's the thing with Kittle. The thing that's so concerning is so the injury that knocked him out of 2020 was the foot that just broke when he was running, right? Like totally freaky non-contact. And then again, this year, week 1, calf non-contact. And this year, to me, I thought he came in lighter and he was talking about, well, I need to take a little bit of weight off so that doesn't happen again to my lower. I got to prevent these non-contact lower body injuries. Boom, another one happens. So that's 2 in a row. What's happening with that lower body there? It's not even like his playing style. It's like I'm 250 pounds and I run a 4.5 and there's a lot of G-forces on that. I mean, I ran a 4.5 when I was 18, but I was 165. Yeah, I ran a 4.5. Humble brag.
Indeed.
It was hand timed by my roommate, so I believe it. And I was on a track and I had spikes, so I think that pretty much shaves off about 1/10 of a second. So I wasn't that fast, but I was decent. This show is about me and how fast I could run when I was 18. That's important.
I've done a quarter mile in 10 seconds, if that counts, but I wasn't running.
That's warp speed.